Everything you're about to hear is for education and entertainment purposes only. Whilst we are licensed, we're not aware of your personal financial circumstances. Any advice is general advice. Equity Mates operates under Australian Financial Services Licence 540697.
Equity Mates!
I will say this about investing. Everything you do learn is cumulative. What I learned at 20 is useful.
Equity.
Welcome to another episode of Equity Mates, a podcast where we explore what is possible in the world of investing. If you've just joined us for the first time, a massive welcome to the community. My name is Bryce, and as always, I'm joined by my equity buddy, Ren. How are you going?
I'm very good, Bryce. Very excited for this episode. It's another big one. We're going to speak to Owen Rask. People may be familiar with him from his podcast. Recently, you've unveiled your portfolio. Yes. I've unveiled my portfolio. Yeah. We're asking Owen to join the party and share what's in his portfolio. Yeah. So that'll be coming up. We're also going to answer a community question about the US election. But no, we're not getting political. We're going to talk about its effect on the share market. But before then, we're going to start with the news of the day. But one piece of housekeeping before we do, a reminder that Comedian v Economist is back on air and absolutely killing it.
Yes.
What other show are you going to find out? Where next for Australian inflation? Why?
On our show?
No. The variety that they're talking about, why you might be about to pay $8 for a coffee, and then what the hell is going on in China. They're just some of the topics they covered in their most recent episode. So, Comedian v Economist, wherever you listen to podcasts, go and check it out. If you haven't listened to them before, we promise you will not be disappointed.
Yes, part of the Equity Mates network, Adam and Thomas, an amazing duo.
News and markets.
All right, Bryce, well, two big pieces of news. We're going to talk about OpenAI and the updates there. But before then, we want to touch on the US dock workers strike.
Yeah.
So for people who aren't familiar, the International Longshoremen's Association represent about 85,000 dock workers across the US. I think about 36 ports on the east coast of the US and in the Gulf Coast. And these are the dock workers that load and unload container ships. And about 45,000 members of the ILA are striking.
Boom. And it's not good news.
It is not good news.
No.
Shipborne trade is over half of total US trade. It is estimated that this strike is going to cost the US economy $5 billion each day.
Nuts.
And to quote a man who I'm starting to respect how brazen he is, the president of the ILA, Harold Daggett, his quote, "And in today's world, I'll cripple you. I will cripple you, and you have no idea what that means."
This is kind of alarming because if this sustains for a long period of time, it's going to have global flow-on effects.
Yeah.
We saw what happened when shipping was crippled during COVID and the effect that had on the costs of goods and services getting around the world. Air freight is going to go through the roof.
Yep.
You're going to have anything that's meant to come by ship is probably going to be delayed. So it's going to have a pretty worldwide effect.
Yeah, so for us talking in Australia, it's going to affect us here. The US is Australia's second largest trading partner after China. About 5 to 10% of our trade is done with the US. So there's going to be a direct impact on our ability to export things to the US, but also import things back from the US. But there's also going to be a second order effect, which is just that, much like we saw in COVID, once containers get stuck at port and once ships sit idle at sea waiting to be unloaded or loaded, the whole global shipping industry backs up.
Yeah.
And that has knock-on effects around the world. And that was why a big reason why prices got so high in COVID. The prices of shipping containers just went through the roof. And if this strike stretches on, it's going to really hurt all of us around the world. And importantly, for people around the world, but particularly in Australia where we haven't got inflation under control, it's going to be inflationary.
Not good news.
It is something that we should be
paying attention
pretty nervous about and paying attention to.
Yeah.
And Harold Daggett, the man I may not agree with, but certainly respect how brazen he's being. He said, the first week, you're going to see prices rise. The second week, auto retailers aren't going to have any cars to sell. The third week, malls are going to shut down because they're not going to have any stock in from China. This is almost verbatim what he said.
It's crazy how quickly this happens. Like 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, malls are shutting down. Like that's how rudimentary ships in, ships out, cases in, cases out. It's like the slightest delay here and it's just like dominoes are falling.
Yeah.
But it's not the only strikes that are going on around the world, Ren.
Well, yeah, I think it's worth just noting, mainly in the US, that we're seeing a real rise in the power of organised labour. So, 45,000 US dock workers. We're also talking in the context of 33,000 Boeing machinists also on strike. Just shy of 50,000 auto workers went on strike last year. Joe Biden became the first sitting president to walk a union picket line last year. Big companies that had successfully repelled efforts to unionize their workforce are starting to not win that fight anymore. Amazon, I think their first warehouse unionized in 2022. Starbucks has seen a big unionization push. In some ways, I think it's a good thing. I mean, like, people politically can agree or disagree, but I think organized labor really decayed for a few decades there, and we are seeing an uptick. Not so much in Australia. We're talking right now as Qantas engineers are striking, but do most people know that?
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So, but it's what happens in the US generally bleeds through to other parts of the world. So it's worth paying attention to that. For years, capital just dominated labor, and an outsized share of the gains went to capital, and now we're starting to see labour reorganise and reassert some of their power. So it is interesting to watch how the pendulum swings. All right, well, the second news story we wanted to touch on was OpenAI, a company that is as far from labour as possible. In fact, in many ways, their technology is going to be the biggest disruption to labour we've seen in a generation. But it's not going to be disruptive to Sam Altman's bank account because he's going to do pretty well out of the latest news.
Yeah, so they've just closed a funding round valuing the company at $157 billion. They raised $6.6 billion with Microsoft coming back on, Nvidia getting in the game, and SoftBank. I think SoftBank put in about $500 million. Yeah. So significant investment from SoftBank.
Honestly, I would be worried. SoftBank has such a bad track record. As soon as I saw that, I was like,
no, this is peak OpenAI. But just to give you a sense of this incredible rise in valuation, not only 12 months ago, they did around at $29 billion. Yeah. So it's a phenomenal story. To put some numbers to the valuation, so they generated $300 million in revenue in the last month, which is up 1,700% since the beginning of the year. Very strong revenue growth. They expect to bring in $11.6 billion in revenue next year, but they expect to lose about $5 billion at the same time. So the costs to run this business, they've specifically called out the costs to buy NVIDIA chips is just the ultimate driver of cost here.
Which is really interesting because NVIDIA has been quite active in a lot of startup funding rounds, but a lot of people are quite cynical about it because NVIDIA puts the money in, the majority of that money then gets used to buy NVIDIA chips.
It's a brilliant model.
The important thing to note, it's not just the valuation that has changed over that past year. OpenAI has been on a journey from a not-for-profit to a capped profit model where investors could make 100x return, but that's it. Now it is a fully fledged, balls to the wall, for-profit enterprise.
Yes, they are going for it. And we've spoken about the stories around the rotation now in some of the founders who have come through, and the executives a lot of them are resigning because of this, the fact that they're now for-profit, and the original mission of AI, safety for the world, and this is just for the good, is somewhat subsiding. So talk is as well that they're going to be giving Sam Altman, the co-founder, 7% equity, which would value that stake at $10.5 billion. And Ren, for a guy who was meant to be not-for-profit, saving the world, I'm a good guy, he's certainly not showing that. In the latest, I don't know if you've seen his car, but he's bought a car called, it's the Koenigsegg Regara, a very rare Swedish sports car. They only make 80 of them in the world, valued at $3 million. So he's certainly celebrating.
Okay. Well, look, I think, That doesn't make him a bad guy, but it does. We have seen a shift in the mission of AI, of OpenAI. I think we could say, less open, more AI.
He's going to be one of the richest men in the world. I reckon at some point we'll see him as it's going to be very hard to chase down Musk, but I reckon he'll be right up there as one of the richest men in the world in the coming decades.
So I've pulled it. So 7% of 156 billion would give him just shy of $11 billion net worth. If that's this is going to be the majority of it. So to put that in context, that would put him in the low 200s of the Forbes rich list. Mike Cannon-Brookes, $10.9 billion, comes in at 223 on the Forbes rich list. So that's about where he would sit.
Yeah. Early days. This guy's just getting started, so is OpenAI. But anyway, if you'd like to keep up with all the news that's going on in business and markets, make sure you subscribe to our daily newsletter, where we'll send you the key business headlines that are making waves around the world, as well as questions from the community that have been answered by experts. So there's a link in the show note and description. Make sure you signed up. Well, as always, we love getting questions from the Equity Mates community. If you would like to submit one, head to equitymates.com/contact. Today's question comes from Drew.
Yes. Now, Bryce, you say we always love getting questions. What we love even more is getting considered, well-researched PDFs from the Equity Mates community.
Makes our job very easy.
So shout out to Drew, because he has asked the question, what are your thoughts on how the US election will impact the stock market? But credit to Drew, he's gone a step further. I've put together some charts attached based on prior elections. Keen to get your general reflections. So what we're going to do in this segment, we'll talk to some of the information that Drew's given us. We'll also talk to some other information we've pulled out. When we went to the JP Morgan media briefing, they also spoke about this, so we can talk to that. But if you want to see Drew's charts, we'll share the PDF in our Facebook discussion group. So head over there and you can see the charts for yourself.
Love it. Well, let's crack in. So how do stocks perform during leading up to the election? What is the impact? And I think the way that Drew split it out here and the way that we'll split it is pre-election and post-election.
Yeah, 100 days either side.
Yeah, 100 days either side. So the first thing, on average, stocks are volatile pre-election, while post-election they become a little bit steadier.
Yeah, during 8 of the past 10 US presidential elections, stock performance was better post-election in those 100 days post than the 100 days pre. And on average, you can see a pretty meaningful step up post-election and a fair bit of volatility pre-election.
Yeah. There is a thing called the fear index, which is just a measure of volatility. And
it's the VIX.
It is the VIX, yeah, VIX. And no surprises that it peaks just before election day and then subsides quite substantially, on average, actually to a point lower than it does 100 days pre-election.
Yes.
But no surprises there.
So to put some numbers to it, if you index, if like you re-baseline 100 days pre-election at 100, it gets up to 141 on average right before the election. Then 100 days after, it's actually lower than where we baselined it. It ends at 96. So to put that in layman's terms, in the 100 days leading up to the election, everyone gets super nervous, super anxious, and volatility rises. And by 100 days after the election, a lot of that fear has subsided.
You can actually trade the VIX. There's an ETF that lets you do it. Yeah, I remember trying to do it back in the day. It was a roller coaster.
I would recommend not doing it.
Yeah.
You can trade the VIX leveraged as well. And I would certainly recommend not doing that.
Yeah, it's like a corkscrew, I remember.
So the question is, that's the average. What is happening this election cycle? And the long and the short of it is, we've seen heaps of volatility pre-election. Because if you go back 100 days, it's right around that August period where
Biden's on the edge.
We had the quote-unquote horror global bloodbath. We had Japan's wobble. We had Nvidia's wobble. The market fell. And so, we've seen a fair bit of volatility.
We have. So it's trending in the right direction, but it is, looking a little bit more bumpy.
Trending in the right direction is an interesting turn of phrase. Trending in the historically consistent direction.
Yes. So then post-election, we've noted that on average the stock market becomes a little less volatile and generally performs better. But is there a difference when it comes to which party wins?
Yeah. To be honest, no.
No. Whether it's Democrat, Republic, the market powers on.
Yeah. I mean, Drew's pulled out each individual election cycle, and the really noticeable one is Obama really had a tough start. Yeah. But you can't really blame him.
No.
Yeah. And for me, I think that's probably the takeaway from this is like, as much as we think presidents change everything, and they change a lot of things, but particularly on the economy, but just generally, like the American political process is pretty calcified, and there's a lot of checks and balances in there that really slow things down. And, you know, even someone as radical as Trump, whether you agree with him or not, like he was completely outside the norm, but like there was a lot of institutional restraints on him in terms of like a Senate that didn't do much, and a House that blocked a lot of stuff, and a Supreme Court that strikes things down. Whether or not some of those institutional restraints have been loosened,
well,
that's a separate conversation. That's probably why you get a lot of fear and anxiety leading up to the election, but then once the election happens, people sort of
revert to the norm.
Yeah. And look, when we went to JP Morgan, it was exactly what they said as well. They said that markets are generally choppy in the run-up to a US election, and then we generally see a rise afterwards. So that's not to say that history will repeat. There is so much... I would say there are so many more important factors than who wins the election on where the market's going to go. Do we see a spike in inflation?
Yeah.
What happens with interest rates? What happens with war in the Middle East?
Yeah.
Do we see oil prices spike because of ongoing tensions in Eastern Europe and the Middle East?
Do the dock workers go back?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All of these things are going to be probably more consequential for the stock market than the US president.
Yeah.
And I think my final point would just be that when you think long term, the unbelievable wealth building power of the stock market has been driven by presidents of both sides, with various policies around the economy, and we would expect that to continue in spite of whatever's happening politically, because of the power of global entrepreneurship, of people working hard, coming up with new technologies, new ways of doing business, and sort of growing the economic pie for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, when you zoom out on the S&P 500 last 20 years, you wouldn't even know when an election took place.
Yeah. So I think that's probably the most important thing, that like it's newsworthy, it's in the moment, it's something that we're all thinking about, but when you retire, you're
not going to be like, damn, I misplayed that 2008 election.
Exactly. Yeah.
If only, it's a good question, and one that often pops up around election times. How should we be playing it? How should we be thinking about it? How should I be positioning my portfolio? But key takeaway here is that doesn't really make that much of a difference long term.
If you did really want to trade the US election, you wouldn't trade the index.
No.
Like you would trade, you
trade the VIX.
Well, no, you can see it. There's this Trump trade when the Trump assassination attempt happened, the first one happened. The Trump trade happened where private prisons, gun manufacturers, and oil companies' share prices all rose on the thought that Trump would get into power. And then when Biden got flicked and Kamala came in, all the renewable energy stocks jumped and those Trump trade stocks fell. So, like, if you do...
You're too late to the game, though.
Well, the election hasn't happened yet.
Like, as soon as that happens, boom, stocks are up. That's it. You've missed it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean? It's not a game that I would want to play.
No. Way too complicated.
You're like one step removed from just going on to Sportsbet and just punting on the election.
100%.
Yeah.
Just have a bet on who wins.
To be honest, punting on the election on Sportsbet is cleaner because there's less variables.
Yeah.
You're actually just betting on who's going to win. When you're trying to do like the Kamala trade or the Trump trade, you're betting on who's going to win, but there's a whole bunch of other variables that could affect it. That's not to say you should punt on the election, but it's just to say that like focus on what matters for you personally to build your wealth.
Yeah.
And that's being consistent,
more than enough,
dollar cost averaging, having a plan and sticking to it. And then however you want to activate politically, do it
Jump on
outside.
Sportsbet.
Do it outside your investing portfolio.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for the question, Drew. Because we mentioned gambling, if you need help, you can call the National Gambling Helpline on 1-800-858-858. Now, if you want the charts that we were speaking about, join the discussion group, our Facebook discussion group. Come and join the conversation along with all of the other Equity Mates community members. We're going to take a quick break, and on the other side, we'll be speaking with expert Owen Rask about what's in his investment portfolio. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Equity Mates Investing. We are excited for this segment because, as you said at the top, Ren, I've released my revealed my portfolio. Yes. You have revealed yours.
Yes.
And now we're on a journey to try and get as many experts as we can to reveal theirs.
Yes, it is going to be tough. I think people are sometimes nervous to share what they actually are investing in. I was certainly nervous to share what I was investing in. So that's why we're very appreciative for this guest for taking the time and being brave enough to share what is in his portfolio. Owen Rask, welcome to Equity Mates.
Thanks, guys. It's always a pleasure to join you and happy to share. I love it.
So Owen is founder of Rask and chief investment officer of Rask Invest. So, he does a lot of, if you haven't come across Owen before, does a huge amount of work in the financial education space and has just launched his own investment platform. So make sure you go and check that out. We'll put a link in the show notes. But Owen, I think we'll just start at the top with one simple question. What is in your investment portfolio?
Sure. Mostly ETFs nowadays, as you guys, wrote about in the books and stuff. ETFs are the kind of the core bedrock of most investors, I would say, that are starting out or newer. So I have all the usual suspects in there, things like VAS, the Vanguard Australian Shares ETF. We've got IVV, which is the iShares S&P 500 unhedged ETF. We've also got a little bit of the hedged one. So that's the currency hedging one. About 1/3 of our global shares are hedged. So that's the IHVV ETF. I don't know how nerdy you want to get, but another one that...
Give it to us. Get nerdy.
Yeah, sure. So another one, which is a bit more spicy, is emerging markets. So this is markets like China, India, that sort of thing. The most recent position that I've added to my own portfolio, which is the portfolio that I also manage, the ETF from VanEck. This is a multi-factor ETF. EMKT is the tick for anyone that's playing along. This ETF invests in emerging markets, but one of the problems that you have with emerging markets is if you go with an index strategy, the first thing is, one, the fees are really high. So they're like as high as some active funds in Australia, for example. And number two is they don't always do a great job of tracking what you want. Because of various issues with currency, with the way markets are constructed in emerging markets, it's typically like on par whether you want an active or a passive strategy. Whereas like most of us here in Australia know that active underperforms passive. It's quite different in emerging markets. And so this fund, what it does is it's not active and it's not passive. It's somewhere in between. It's multi-factor. The reason why we bought it is because it kind of screens for quality companies in emerging markets and holds them for the long term, so there's not much turnover. In terms of our cash positions, I hold the AAA cash ETF from BetaShares. Just as a little bit of a weird one, there's a lot of cash ETFs you could buy, but this one in particular uses a high interest savings accounts and term deposit type things, which is different. Most of the cash ETFs you see around the world invest in money market securities, kind of like Warren Buffett with Berkshire. He owns money market securities. If you see cash on his Berkshire balance sheet, that's money market securities. And they typically don't yield as much as a bank account because there is a little bit of extra risk that comes with a bank account versus a treasury or something like that. So we own that. And the two bond ETFs that we have are IAF, the Aussie one, and then VBND, the Vanguard Global one. So that's the core portfolio. They can chop and change, but that's kind of the bedrock. Then obviously I have satellites.
Oh, and before we get to the satellites, I think one question that people might have about the core is IVV and IHVV both are in the core. Can you talk to us about why you have some hedged, some unhedged, rather than one or the other?
That's a really good question, mate, because particularly at the moment as we record this, the Australian dollar is nearing 70 cents. And there are instances like most people that are particularly maybe younger investors or people that are newer to investing might be familiar with like the Australian dollar being like 60 to 70 cents. But there are a lot of times where that's not the case. Like in 2010, 2011, the Australian dollar was worth more than the US dollar. And it's only been really since then, like the last 10 years, that we've seen the Australian dollar slowly falling while at the same time the US stock market going up. So that's like a double hit in terms of double goodness. If you're investing in the US, you get in the US market going up, but hey, those US dollars that you're investing in the US market are also worth more. So you're getting like a double hit. But we could be at a time now where even if the US market keeps going up, the Australian dollar might not keep going down. And so for us, that's not an all or nothing. Like some people seem to have this approach. It's like, well, am I hedged or unhedged? Well, why not just do a little bit of both? And a lot of the data suggests that even just a little bit of hedging in there is okay. So that's what we've got in what we call our Jupiter strategy, which is a strategy that I personally invest in. So, we have a lot in unhedged, slightly lower fees, and then a little bit of hedged version in there as well. And it's just a good blend. As you get towards retirement, you probably want more currency hedging than less because it just helps neutralize that impact for you a bit.
And Owen, apologies if I completely missed it there, but no exposure to Europe, like direct ETF exposure? No. Not interested?
No, I like to holiday there. I just don't like to invest there. So it's a quite different. Obviously, every jurisdiction that you invest in, there may be different tax consequences. A common question that I also get is like, well, why use IVV and not VGS, which is the big Vanguard all-world one? And there's like iWorld as well from iShares and a heap of others, BGBL, whatever. The reality is I think that like you don't need 1,500 securities in an ETF to capture a lot of the global growth. There are ETFs like IOO from iShares, which is even like I think it's 100 in there. And that has a higher fee, so we wouldn't invest in that anyway. But that one in particular has 100 global companies, which I think is adequate diversification, to be honest. I'm a kind of a believer in American exceptionalism in that if you look at the US companies, like I'm recording this on a Rode mic. I think you've got a Shure mic. Rode is, I'm pretty sure, Australian, but like most of the things around us are coming to you through an iMac, Apple, Microsoft, all these names, Tesla, whatever. They're businesses that change the world. And that's backed by like the biggest defense budget in the world. It's backed by democracy. The greenback is the currency. So I kind of believe that is going to keep winning, and I'm willing to put my chips there. But another interesting thing is that like around about 30 to 35% of the sales of those big American companies come from international markets. So even though I don't own, Unilever shares or something like that, or I don't invest directly into the UK, I know that people in the UK use iPhones. Even people in Positano in Italy would use an iPhone, right? So like, I don't need to invest there and expose my portfolio to an additional layer of regulation and uncertainty to get that exposure. And another thing is we still have I'm still in the back of my mind, I'm like mindful that like China and India are like the two emerging superpowers. And so that's where the e-market ETF that I mentioned before, that still gives us that exposure. And if I'm wrong in a few years, we can always switch on an ETF like IEU or the INDA type ETFs, the India ETFs. Like we can switch them on in the future if we want to through a satellite position or a new core position.
Nice.
So that's the core of your portfolio, Owen. Let's get to your satellite positions. Talk to us about what sits in that part of your portfolio.
Thanks, Ren. I think that it's probably worth some context is probably important here. Like the Rask Group, which is the company that I run, is by far the biggest investment I've got. Like there's no that is by far the biggest investment. I don't own all of it. I own about 60% of it. That is by far the most valuable thing in our financial lives. So I don't think that that's necessarily a core or a satellite. It's probably core to my being, but other than that, it's kind of like risky, like a satellite, but it's kind of like where my salary comes from. So maybe it's part of the core, but that's a big thing. And I think that for anyone that runs a business or can buy shares in private businesses, you can do that too. For example, I invested, the biggest single investment that has happened over probably the last 2 years was an investment in another private business. So rather than investing in something on the stock exchange, a private company, and that company is like a digital company, a digital marketing company, that just seemed to be a good way to invest my money at the time. But if that was like on the stock exchange, it would be like a micro nano cap or something like this. So just for context. And the only individual share that I own right now is Pro Medicus. PME is the ticker symbol. And the reason that that's the only individual share is because in order to align myself with our investors, I cleared the decks. And I kind of sold a bunch of shares to put it into the ETF portfolios that I would manage. And I invested a lot of personal money, to be honest, in helping to support and build the Rask Group and launching the investment platform. But that's going to change over the next year. I'm going to keep investing in individual companies. Like, I keep kicking myself every time I look at like WiseTech, and I was like selling at $20. I don't know what it is now. I was looking at XRF Scientific this morning, which is a small industrials business. Like, that's like 4x'd in the last 2 years. And the big one for me, one of my longest holdings was Xero, which I sold like a year ago. And that's, been really disappointing to watch that keep running.
Yeah.
So like, I would love to get back into it and do more of that. But obviously it's just capital dependent, and hopefully over the next year I start to re-add to those positions.
Yeah, right.
So the question becomes, you mentioned some high quality businesses there that you sold. How come Pro Medicus didn't get the chop as well?
So the big thing with Pro Medicus was it was the very first company I ever recommended to our Rask Invest membership community. I think it was 2017 now.
Oh, wow.
And the second was Apple, and then Altium, I think, was third. And I bought it after our members, which is what I always have to do. And I think I bought about $7.40 or so. And I'd previously seen Sam Huppert, who's the CEO and co-founder of the business, a few years before, and I didn't buy it when it was like way less than that. And I always follow the principles of David Gardner, who's the co-founder of the Motley Fool and the rule breaker investing guy. And I was like, how does he like buy like Amazon at $2.30 and keep holding it? And I thought, just on principle alone, I have to keep holding this company for as long as I possibly can. And so even though it would have been easier to sell it, at times I have sold small portions of it, there's no way I'm going to sell what I've got left, because I'm like, it's just one of those things that I wanted to kind of put those runs on the board and just keep holding and holding and holding and holding. So I've maintained that position, and I've been very fortunate that the valuation has just got more and more stretched through time. Its company's obviously exceptional, but I just wanted to keep it for that. Maybe it's a vanity thing, but it's honestly like I just wanted to keep it just to say that I've been able to get like a 50 bagger or something like that. And that's the sole reason.
Nice. So notable emissions Bitcoin.
Well, mate, I do have some NFTs, and if anyone and a little bit of Bitcoin. If someone wants to tell me how I could possibly figure out what my secret phrase was,
no.
By all means, tell me, because I can't find it, and so I've lost that forever. So there's an NFT of my face that I minted years ago. Getting around in the ether somewhere, like the literal ether. It's out there. I can't control it. I've got it in my wallet that I can no longer access.
Oh no. Well, Owen, look, we really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your portfolio with us. It is much appreciated. I think people love hearing what is under the hood, but I think it also gives people listening confidence that you're not employing any crazy exotic strategies. You're buying ETFs like the rest of us.
Yeah.
So hopefully that leaves people with a bit of confidence. But thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolute pleasure, guys, always. So thanks for having me.
You have been listening to an Equity Mates Media production. In the spirit of reconciliation, Equity Mates Media acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. This podcast is intended for education and entertainment purposes. Any advice is general advice only and has not taken into account your personal financial circumstances, needs, or objectives. Before acting on general advice, you should consider if it is relevant to your needs and read the relevant product disclosure statement. And if you're unsure, please speak to a financial professional. The hosts of this podcast and their guests may have positions in the companies mentioned. Equity Mates Media operates under an Australian Financial Services Licence 540697.